Two topics were there that we were supposed to do today. We had to continue with the write-up on forest policies, and then there is the other topics such as development displacement. But I thought of starting with something different, especially if one is going for this year's exam. And this is a topic that has been gaining significance in the academic circles, especially when it comes to Indian anthropology. See, such kind of questions need a broader understanding of what is happening in the discipline. So one topic, because we are almost coming to the end of your course, I thought such kind of pinching questions you'll have to be ready with. There was one question that was put across in one of the interviews to a functioning anthropologist, to a practicing anthropologist, based on which several essays were also written. The question was, simply put, what is the status of Indian anthropology today? The question is, what is the status of Indian anthropology today? In fact, when we are trying to answer this question, this discussion can also be incorporated in the topic of evolution of anthropology in India. Previously, when we had dealt with the topic, evolution of anthropology in India, we had more or less considered LP Vidyarthi as the basis, the three stages of him. And then at that time I told you that Vidyarthi was mostly dealing with the things maybe before 1990, after which, his presence was also required to see what was happening. So after 1990s, whatever changes were there, I was asking you to make a note separately, saying that, see, if at all you could recall what we were saying there, a multidisciplinary approach or expansion of the discipline, etc., such kind of things we said, and we made the answer very heavy towards the end, saying that, see, we are doing all this, so we are gaining importance and our horizons are expanding, kind of stuff. So that was a feel-good thing. But when I'm talking about this currently, what is the status of anthropology in today's time, Indian anthropology? There is very little to feel happy about. And if such a question is asked, and the student is clearly mentioning that things are not so very rosy and happy, you are making the examiner happy. Don't always think that I should write everything positive, I should praise anthropology and kind of a thing. Don't have that mindset. So I thought I'll present to you some brief points so that you will be in a position to answer such a question, if at all that comes in the exam. Once again, I'm repeating the question: what is the status of anthropology in India today? I would want to start discussion on this with a conference that was held in 2004, Indian Science Congress, Meet 2004, that actually triggered a debate about whether anthropology is relevant today and what is the problem of anthropology in India. There is one very popular anthropologist by name Srivastav, who had authored good number of books. he has raised this discussion, he tried to go into the details of what might be wrong with this discipline. The first thing that had upset anthropologists was that, if time permits, you can go back to see the Indian Science Congress. That's almost an annual thing. The Science Congress conference, when it happens, they divide the disciplines into some categories. 2004 was a time when different kind of nomenclature was used to address different disciplines. For example, zoology was called animal science, or botany was called plant science, and the word science started to get added to the disciplines. And nowhere in the list we could find anthropology. And anthropology was added under the title behavioral science. If at all you could recall what we have said in one of our classes, I told you that in the initial times, anthropology was studied as culturology under the major department of psychology. So is it that we are going back to the same kind of a cycle? Sir, what I am saying now is a typical case of India. The status of anthropology elsewhere in the world, especially Northern America, is very much different. And of course, Western Europe, that was the giver of anthropology to the rest of the world. What is happening there is very much different from what we are having here. So first problem Srivastav identified was that nomenclature and naming process has changed. Now, you don't find the title there. And when he was going into the details of why they have incorporated anthropology into behavioral sciences along with psychology, etc., etc., one of the answers he got is previously in the last ISC conference, when with an anthropology title participation was advertised or participation was sought, hardly anybody was there. So it was a wasteful exercise. I mean, it is a disheartening exercise that, I invited a conference and not even a handful of people are there. It is discouraging. So, I would place them with the other group. So people will not be coming especially for this particular title, but for several other things which are listed in that group they would come. At least numbers will be there. Many times numbers give confidence. Many times numbers give confidence. Thandarandi master. లేకపోతే ఇక్కడ కాన్ఫిడెన్స్ పోతుంది. This is one. Second thing he was mentioning was there are certain problems that the discipline was encountering. In order to understand that, he says one has to look into the internal processes that are happening in the discipline and what is external to the discipline. Why is it that anthropology is facing some problem? The problem, he says, we will have to understand what is happening inside and the outside. Everything emerged from here. People were actually not recognized with the same title there, and attendance was coming down. Government was also universities also were not seem to be interested in talking a lot about anthropological studies, etc. And being a person who had been practicing anthropology for such a long time, he went into the details of what must have gone wrong. He says that you will have to examine yourself and your relation with the outsiders. Now here what's going to happen is, certain characteristics which we have been boasting of about anthropology and which we always show as the strength of anthropology are going to be taken to task by him. And do not get into confusion, sir. What we are going to talk about now is a self-evaluation of the discipline itself. But just because in the self-evaluation you are getting slightly a different kind of a picture from what we are trained to believe in, do not try to have a lower morale, and don't stop praising the discipline, don't stop using those things as strengths of anthropology at different places in the syllabus. The reason being, this is a man who is trying to identify what are the ailments the discipline is facing. Sometimes we try to give self-satisfaction, self-help, and try to feel good with whatever we are having. Though for an outsider, it looks to be not so very good. And sometimes we know what mistakes that are there with us. For an outsider, our mistakes may not be known. So this man says that we should be able to identify our mistakes. So if somebody is saying that multidisciplinary approach is positive, so far you have learnt it as when I say that S.C. Dubé was using a multidisciplinary approach in village studies, etc., getting a knowledge from different people, etc., etc. When I was saying that, we had presented in a very positive and high-sounding quality of anthropology, but this man questions that. So once again, let me say this to you, that certain characteristics which we have been boasting of about the discipline, that were actually challenged by this man. And according to him, those are the characteristics that are pulling the discipline back. Now, I would start with some of the things here. First and foremost is, when it comes to the internal aspects of the discipline, right from the beginning, because we had been imitating the British way of anthropology, and in the beginnings of anthropological discipline, we found that anthropology was more or less addressed as a general anthropology. If at all you notice your syllabus, first segment of your first paper, first section of your first paper, we see in bits and pieces most of the syllabus accommodated there. You have social element, you have archaeological element, you have biological element, everything you find in the first section. If at all you had attended the first lecture, I had categorized this particular section as general anthropology. And the second one we called biological or physical anthropology, and second paper we said Indian social system and tribal studies. Nowhere are we naming it as social anthropology. If at all somebody, because at that time you did not study anthropology, so that question must not have come to you. But now if you go back and see the first class notes, you might be confused, where is the social anthropology? The reason why I have categorized it as general anthropology is it is a bag of all those things. Now, one problem which Srivastav says is, in several other scientific disciplines, as the discipline grows, you go into compartmentalization of the discipline. You have done your medicine, so you go on for mastering, specializing one particular wing. You might be having an overall idea initially, but later you are actually specializing in one particular branch of medicine. You go so deep into it that many times you forget what you have done in the general medicine. When we are talking about general medicine, it is more or less the same, 4-5 goliyan wahi de rahe ho, but it's only that the title we are changing. But when it comes to the specialists there, specialists are respected, and these specialists over a period of time try to establish a functional relationship with other specialists. So it is that importance is being given to a detailed study of one smaller segment of your discipline, and that way everybody is trying to do, all the people who are specializing in particular fields, they are trying to have a very in-depth knowledge, but they did not leave the relation with the rest of them. Whenever they think that their knowledge has to be, is intersecting with some other system, so they are trying to work together. So that kind of a synthesis and integration is seen across the disciplines. When it comes to anthropology, the problem was, especially when we look at American anthropology, it starts getting bifurcated, trifurcated, and we see several branches coming up. Especially when we say sociocultural anthropology, archaeology, or physical anthropology, within several sub-branches coming up like medical anthropology. There is a specialization. So if at all you are trying for any admission in the courses there, we observe that they welcome people from any any discipline into anthropology. So they try to provide you, suppose you have chosen, for example, archaeology, they would provide you the basic course of archaeology, or maybe some brief idea about the entire anthropology, but they don't expect you to be a champion in all of them. They would be focusing for you only on one particular branch that you must have chosen. The problem with India, Srivastava says, is we don't specialize. Indian anthropologists right from the beginning have been glorifying general anthropology. And he also names at one point of time the syllabus of UPSC also. Previously, I mean some years ago, there used to be an option in the subject. Among the options, you have chosen anthropology. But within anthropology, in the first paper, there used to be a possibility of either taking physical anthropology section or anthropological thought. It was very easy to clear the exam also those days. I mean, much better to score. Syllabus was also very cute and very, very small. Anybody could in a month of time could study and get very good score. 1 month is a big time for that syllabus. And now you see that entire booklet is written with under the syllabus. But then it used to be hardly 1 page long. The first paper you used to have about 8 chapters. उसमें से फिर choice होगा. आप ये पढ़ो या फिर ये पढ़ो. That was incredible actually. So based on your background, you would either take, suppose you are from the life sciences, you would go for physical anthropology. That was something that was a right approach actually. If at all we see what is happening elsewhere in the world, like American anthropology, that is considered to be the basis today. Now what he says is, anthropologist in India is expected to know something about everything in the discipline. You are expert nowhere. You are doing but really not doing much. By the time you have begun to study something, we say stop. Bas hai. I mean, you need not have to. It's like everywhere you are trying to swim in the shallow waters. Nowhere you are actually going to the depth of the subject. If you are doing something like an undergraduation and post-graduation in anthropology, entire undergraduation you are doing anthropology along with several other subjects. उसमें अंग्रेजी भी होगा, हिंदी भी होगा, या फिर हिस्ट्री भी होगा, जियोलॉजी भी होगा, And then when you come to the masters, in the first paper also, I think you are doing in the first year, entire syllabus you will have to study. Only in the second paper you are going, in the second year, you are going to have some kind of an elective. And by the time you understand the elective, your year is over. And maybe you will have to start with MPhil or PhD in order to get a complete depth in that particular wing that you have chosen as a specialization. So the problem with Indian anthropology is there is a preference for general anthropology, meaning there is a preference for not being an expert in any field. When I am saying you are not being an expert in any field, the functional utility of what you are studying is almost zero. I hope you are following what I am saying. And he is trying to examine certain reasons for this. See, if at all we see the popular classification of anthropology, that is physical anthropology and cultural anthropology, sir, whatever I am discussing here, I want you to scribble down the points. We will not be giving a separate dictation on this. It was basically to make you understand a process and in order to be able to generate an answer with the kind of top things that we are discussing. I am talking about Srivastava's analysis here. He says we will have to examine what is happening inside and what is the externality, meaning the relationship within the content and what's happening with the content and your relation with the other disciplines. Now when it comes inside, I said that general anthropology is something that has been preferred and no in-depth study was happening in individual branches there. And what he was finding was that initially also we found a good number of people from life sciences taking up anthropology. But there came a mindset that anthropology is basically a cultural study rather than anything else. And more so, what we find is that some of you who must have done the life sciences PGs and researchers, you must have also identified the backwardness in the laboratories, the lacunae in the laboratories, the kind of fund crisis that we find here. So Class C laboratories are difficult to have. Not many universities have the physical anthropology laboratories with us. Forget about archaeology laboratory. What we have is a laboratory of socio-cultural anthropology that's everywhere available in our society. So when establishment of laboratory is expensive, the physical anthropologists also were forced to take a diversion and to study socio-cultural anthropology, which actually they don't either appreciate and comprehend, and hence the quality of writings also seem to be inferior, because your heart is somewhere else. You wanted to become an anthropologist because of thinking that okay, I would study biological evolution and all that stuff. But finally, when you come here, there is nothing to do here in the laboratory. And hence you will have to be satisfied with cultural evolution, which you never understand. So this is basically an administrative difficulty, number one. Secondly, many times in the definitions, in the positive characteristics of anthropology, we mentioned holism or holistic approach and integrationalism. You remember? The anthropology is a holistic study, integrationalistic study. By holistic study, we meant that many times we define anthropology as a comprehensive study of human across time and space, everything associated with the human, whether it is culture, biology, language, blah, 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 everything is studied. At the end of the discipline, you will be wondering, what did I study? That is not your problem. That is the discipline's basic lacunae. Now, he says that when we talk about integration, and holism, in general in anthropology, we said that anthropology has so many components, and we are holistic because we are studying all of them. So I am called an anthropologist if I study all of them, irrespective of the depth of knowledge that I have. Secondly, the belief is that cultural studies or anthropological studies are integrationist, meaning that it believes that there is a change at one place, change is found, change happens in all the other fields, meaning that if my biology changes, my belief system changes, my other aspects, my language changes, my other aspects. So if I'm introducing change in one of my elements there, rest of the things automatically get changed. That is the kind of understanding that I have been giving to you all this while. Neither I was wrong, nor you are wrong in getting that. Because that is what is written in the textbooks, that is what Indian anthropologists are trained to believe in. Now, I thought that maybe we have reached a stage where we can challenge, where we can question what was actually taught to us, and so that we can give a kind of a very contemporary answer to such a question. Now, what he says is the meaning of holism and integration should not be understood in this way. Definitely, holism and integration have to be appreciative aspects of anthropology. But what he meant by holism is, see, there have to be different blocks therein. And each of the block, meaning that each of the branches within the discipline, so you call archaeology, medical anthropology, ethnography, etc., etc., each of these disciplines, sub-disciplines, have to be studied at a greater depth, incorporating academic and practical dimensions. That he says holism. Holism is not simply that I, as an individual anthropologist, know everything. No, it's not that. Holism means there should be branches. Every branch must have a representation. And those representatives of every branch must hold in-depth studies. Are you following what I'm saying? And by integrationalism, what he means is each of these branches must be supporting each other with the depth of the knowledge, and they should be able to grow together. Am I clear to you? General anthropologist is not somebody who is required in today's world, either in Western Europe, especially in British anthropology. British anthropology was the last one to leave the title of general anthropology. But right from the beginning, American anthropology believed in specialization. General anthropologists do not exist there. Australia has given up the titles of general anthropology, but India is the only country where general anthropologist is still surviving. When we say the general anthropologist is surviving, it means that we have actually been living in the earliest ages of anthropology still. We haven't evolved in the discipline of anthropology. I hope you are getting what I'm saying. Specialization is necessary. Those specialized areas have to work with one another so that the entire group can progress. And that's where I'm very appreciative of that organization I was talking about in Jabalpur yesterday. They started doing this particular exercise. If they are dealing with the health-related issues, very in-depth studies were actually being taken up now. Now, Srivastava says something else. It is not simply the lack of laboratories and the expenses that are required. You are having certain other pulling things there. You would want to go into the areas where government might be investing or where some kind of job opportunity is there. The job may not be the kind of profile that you are ready to offer or you are desirable to work with. So there are certain things that were becoming a fancy in Indian anthropology, such as environmental adaptation, or you have things like dermatoglyphic studies, or maybe blood group studies, or at the most you would be going for census studies and how demography is changing, where you would be having very little of physical anthropological dimension, and mostly it is the cultural dimension that you would be focusing on. And maybe family planning methods, why they are failing, what is more attractive, what is less attractive in family planning. So these are the kind of works that people started to pick up. So if an anthropologist was hired in the government, these are the kind of jobs that were. We have already seen several anthropologists being appointed for various census documentations, etc. And we were trying to glorify anthropologists' presence there. In fact, we will have to understand that this seems to be lesser utilization of the capabilities of anthropologists than what they can actually do. So we started with saying that general anthropology is a problem. Though branches are there, they don't have an in-depth understanding. Anthropologists in India, when there is no opportunity in their own field, such as biological anthropology, they were trying to do things such as demographic and dermatoglyphic studies, etc. So they're downgrading there. It is not simply that. Their relation with the external world, meaning that they respect the command in the presence of the rest of the disciplines. See, if any discipline that can come close to anthropology in comparison had been sociology. In one of the classes, I remember to have said this, that see, the focus area of anthropology is simple society. People were critical that when simple societies were coming into the mainstream society, there is more or less an assimilation happening or integration happening. They are losing their original character, when they are losing those simple traits or the primitive traits, what is the requirement of the discipline of anthropology? That was the question we said. And the answer also, I'll recall for you. I said that, see, whenever two cultures are colliding, two cultures are coming in contact with each other, there is bound to be a friction. And whenever there is a friction, there is bound to be somebody who has to smoothen the relationship, and that is where anthropologist is required. Sir, your answer should not change there. You stick to them. Don't worry about what you were trained all this while. Don't suddenly say that, no, you have taught all this and now you are saying that, no. See, for every perspective, there has to be the second side. What is now thought is, by people like Srivastav, is that by doing this, see, you are actually starting to work on simple societies, and when they seem to be vanishing, you want to prove your identity. When you want to prove your identity, you say that, see, I am studying culturally different groups. I am studying cultures in the slums. I call it slum anthropology. I am studying urban areas. I call it urban anthropology. This you are doing because the original place where content is available, you are not focusing there. For example, studying the archaeological past with all the kinds of techniques that are necessary, all the kinds of excavations that are necessary, that you are not able to do. Reasons may be financial, reasons may be lack of technology, whatever. I am very thankful to organizations such as Archaeological Survey of India. They are trying to expand into adding certain branches there. One of the branches that is actually making a good name these days is underwater archaeology. As if they have taken a step after Srivastav started questioning them. But we are definitely late. Now what we have to look at is our respect in front of everybody else. We were already defeated when there are hardly any entries at anthropology discussion forum in Indian Science Congress. That's the first major defeat. See, if numbers are there, they are not talking quality, then okay, we can improve the quality. When quantity is not there, that was a serious problem. What we will have to do now is strengthen the internal aspects so that you are able to offer yourself as a force to reckon with in front of the others. If the depth of knowledge is shallow, you will not be in a position to compete with anybody else. It's as simple as when you are answering question like what is the relation between anthropology and history. The first thing you start with is, see, we study so much, you study only this much. Why I also wanted to talk to you on these issues is, these are the kinds of criticisms people from other disciplines might put across to you. If somebody who is really in such an emotional attachment and love towards their subject, they might start challenging you. A sociologist might challenge you. See, mera optional grade hai, tumhara nahi hai, kind of a thing. The wiser thing will be to accept the negative that you have. So strengthening the internal aspects there. One basic flaw that we still have to fight, and how this will be fought, that time alone can tell. Because every university has to come up and research forums on anthropologists. They should try to look for maybe associations with international bodies and other universities across the world, so that they can improve on the researches here. Unless that happens, specialization cannot grow. Thankfully, in India, in the last couple of decades, aspects such as forensics have tremendously increased when compared to maybe 30-40 years ago. Maybe because the inquisitiveness, people started to have to explore the crime or whatever. Or maybe because more and more paternity questions are coming, how to solve them, kind of a thing. Reasons could be whatever. Maybe crime also has a positive side of itself. Crime in this case has a positive contribution, that it is giving rise to study of. So it is, I think, a time when internally there has to be strengthening, a mutual respect. I told you in the previous classes also, the kind of disturbances people used to have, like Guha and Srinivas were having, Ghurye and Srinivas were having. So people from the physical anthropology thinking high of themselves and demeaning the social anthropology, but they also should know that they didn't do much. They were also finally talking about culture in such an incipient manner. So one thing we should learn is respecting each other and trying to assist each other in going to the depth of it. So personality change has to happen within the discipline. Before calling yourself a behavioral science, you should behave and then try to respect each other. Enhance the depth of the subject. Invest more on the researchers and laboratories. Maybe global collaborations have to come. Don't consider interdisciplinary thing as the kind of interdisciplinary that you are having as a hallmark of your subject. Interdisciplinary, maybe you should be able to contribute to that level. If at all you are saying that I am contributing to you. So many times we said that Gujarat's non-violence, Gujarat's vegetarianism could be because of particular things, etc. When we are saying this, some people said that it may be because of Jainism, some people said that it is because of Gandhi, some people said something else. So when you are trying to make such a claim, you should be able to have a proof that I have contributed. When in some other class I said that anthropologists claim that history writing has changed because of the impact of anthropology. We said at that time that currently history is written from different perspectives. And that kind of different perspectives are actually the result of interaction with anthropology. God knows whether it is true or not, but then we are making a claim. When you are making a claim, you should be able to prove the claim. That is not happening. Investments have to come. And proper applications. You should be able to apply on the field. The application is not happening. So it's something like this. If at all somebody wants to study the discipline, you study general anthropology and be nowhere, or you try to get a specialization, leave the country, go outside, contribute for them, contribute for their society and for their government. That's where you are. When I say external factors, it is like building of that contact. When I'm saying this, claiming that, I'll give you this example with maybe sociology. Sociologists say that they are studying the mainstream society. They're happy with it. But anthropologists said that we study primitive, we study contemporary, we study whatever the list is. By doing this, we are actually trying to get a question on our own identity. When I say that relation with the external world or the other disciplines, the rule should be that let the boundary be intact. Don't shun the boundary there. We said it many times that sociology and anthropology borders are blurring, and then at many places the departments are also getting united. Anthropologist is sitting in the sociology department only, because we are more or less dealing with the same thing. If you are doing more or less the same thing, why are you there? So it should be like, try to see to it that the boundary is intact so that your identity will be there. There would definitely be some kind of a diffusion from the other disciplines that is encourageable. But then if you are trying to give up your own special identity, The existence of the discipline itself is a challenge. Did I reach you? So every branch in that way should be able to carve out its own identity, what actually we should be doing. So if you say that it is a discipline that studies the evolution of man from different perspectives, whether you say biological perspective or cultural perspective, the one who is studying biological perspective should be able to go deep into it and try to give us the proofs and researches. The problem we have noticed many times in the classes, when it comes to say fossil studies, true that we don't have fossils, but we don't have people to study them also. So in a way, the discipline itself is getting fossilized. It has almost become fossilized. We still are stuck at general anthropology, studying the same thing for UPSC also. University also is studying the same thing. Meaning that the discipline has to gear up for its special identity, keeping its arms loaded, saying that, see, this is what we want to study, go to any depth whatever is possible. See, everything said and done, as long as the funds are not there, encouragement and jobs are not there, it's as if we are offering modern education to tribal, and tribal is questioning where is the job. One has to understand that countries like South Africa, Zaire, they have anthropologists in every ministry and department. You may say that they have ethnic diversity, cultural diversity, and hence we also have a huge amount of that. It was only because of that reason people from across the world were coming to India to study the discipline of anthropology here. So this was something like it was something like a subject for them. It was offering a subject. Now we actually were offering a subject without the tools for studying our own selves. So when Srinivas was saying that anthropology is a study of our own selves, in order to study we should be having a proper academic and financial encouragement and investment. That's what is lacking here. So in that answer you tries to praise towards the end Archaeological Survey of India, then Forensic Society of India that has been training good lot of people. It's real encouragement. Because I myself got enrolled into one forensic sciences course last week. Good number of people, the Pune-based organization. I didn't expect that on such a short notice. The notice came in the last minute. October 1st they have launched the course, and after the mid of September the notification came. So within that short period of time, they are having about 15 different courses, each of them running into 1 year, 2 years, etc. And massive turnover. So, acha laga. At one point of time, I felt maybe Dhruva also motivated people to take up course. That's once again, sir, knowingly or unknowingly.
Coming up with reasons and justifications about the how anthropology is highly relevant to.
You can say that. It's totally justified.
Because most of the primitive societies either disappeared or assimilated, and there are not many positive evidences in India, and other aspects like society and culture are done by sociology.
I'll add something here. For the existence of a discipline such as this, you need not necessarily have the subject matter remaining in your own society. We still have societies that are not assimilated. In Indian context itself, we still have the subject matter left out. If at all you want to explore, the subject matter is there. But then, in order for the discipline to exist, continue to exist, it is not necessary that you alone have the subject. You can actually explore the rest of the world also. Most of the other universities on the western side of the world, they are doing that. They need not be having all that paraphernalia. They need not be having a fossil man. They need not be having that kind of a culture. Or they need not be having the rest of the things that we speak about. But then they are going out, going to the subject wherever it is found and trying to study. So if you are not, first of all, maybe whatever subject that you have, you study it. Half the time you are not studying, outsider is coming and studying. And then you are writing down in your book, see, so and so person has come and written this book. And then being motivated, somebody else is also doing a second grade study there, kind of a thing. So I hope you understood what I'm saying. So you inside, continue to, whatever you are having the subject matter left out, try to study and preserve it. I'm not talking about isolation, preserving in the sense, preserving the knowledge and going deep into the things, etc. And when I'm saying this, it is not simply the cultural studies. It can be any particular branch of the discipline. Of course, these days epidemiology has tremendously picked up in the researches. Because when you are when you are a flourishing society of the diseases, you definitely would be. And then you need not have the subject. You go where the subject is existing. And then. आप कुछ कह रहे थे? See, as far as, suppose I am looking at what is happening within India itself or comparing with somebody else, the application in the defense studies for that matter. In fact, I wanted to say this. We are looking for one lecture by an expert from the defense itself. I'm looking for their time, basically. The one who is working in the defense as a scientist, actually. And unlike several other scientists, he has been working on defense anthropology, which is a rarity in India. So what is happening now with them is they are trying to use the theoretical aspect, whatever is there. For example, acclimatization is there. In order to acclimatize the soldier to particular situations, so rapid preparations, and then kind of maybe that may require some kind of chemical intervention also. Maybe some kind of medication may be required, or some kind of physical training is required, and certain aspects of preparing yourself emotionally, kind of a thing. So these are the kind of works they are doing. One is preparing the soldier to handle some kind of a difficult situation, like high altitude studies that are going on in India. They are and the kind of maybe the equipment that you will have to design. In fact, we are still in the initial stages there. What kind of equipment has to be designed, like ergonomy, what we call. The ergonomic studies are still picking up in India when compared to, suppose you go to say, for example, American Army, the thoroughly worked out ergonomic studies there, based on your stature, based on the arm movement, to what is the weight that you can comfortably carry. So it should be high precision, low weight kind of a thing. ऐसा नहीं कि आप weight ज़्यादा है, performance कम है, like the typical Indian shoe or the typical Indian dress that we have, or the rifles that we have, the less precision and more kind of a weight. These are the kind of practical applications. This could be one. Or if you go to see the South American, the South African Defense Forces itself, they have full-length studies, one of the cultural aspects of the rest of the ethnic groups, number one, with whom they are not friends actually. They study the enemies in detail. And then the physical studies of the enemies, meaning their physical capabilities. Every culture group, every ethnic group or race, every race might be coming up with its own strengths and weaknesses. Some people are good runners, some people are good shooters, some people are good at something else. Or some people are good at creating disturbance in the other society. They have the capabilities. You don't know that he's operating those capabilities in your society, and you're getting to fight in a busy way without knowing what is the responsible, what is the one that is responsible there. These are the people. South African Defense Force was the first one to have full-fledged wing of anthropologists. cultural studies are there, biological studies are there, and then intrusion studies, meaning that whatever we say that we are trying to send some kind of conduction of undercar operations, and then trying to send our own people across the border and doing all sorts of things, they have been doing it for a long time. It's only that they don't advertise. We advertise, we take movies on them, we publicize. We may be doing this, but we may be showing much more. No? But then there is. You can say that. You can say. When I am trying to present the other side, I am not saying that I am dumping the disciplines. You can. And that's what is desirable. I mean, even if the whole essay you have been abusing, towards the end you say that no, we are also doing some good work. Maybe in the future we are going to do much more. Be hopeful. If you are not hopeful, you cannot be fit for an administrator. You are the only one who should come to the rescue of the people when everybody fails.
Why Indian central or state governments are not much interested to appoint anthropologists? Is there any particular reason, unlike US or South Africa? Why particular?
Once you go into the government, you'll understand much better. But here, let me give one simple statement, that is, one is there has to be personalities of that kind. The in-depth knowledge of that kind. Secondly, there has to be a continuing tradition. Once that old man died, the first prime minister died, the tradition of appointing academicians in well-to-do position was also given up. Whom you are appointing, what are the terms of reference with your neighbors, how friendly you are, how you are resolving the issues, everything depends on that person's personality. In international relations, you must have seen this. The kind of language we used to use when Shastriji was there or he was there, when compared to when she came, there was a drastic difference in the kind of terminology that she always used to have the sword first. So she would first take the sword, keep it on the table and talk. That's how things are. First of all, the power holders should see the capability that you are having, or the capabilities that have to be built of that kind. Many of you must have read this book, small one, though this was not the agenda to talk in today's class. Letters from a father to the daughter. Many of the fathers, who love their daughters, they gift this book. Gifting the book is fine, but do you also do the same kind of letter writing? Beautiful letters, and then where he used to draw the fossils there. Those letters I really liked. Someone else, but then he was describing, right? Whether you are drawing or you are circulating the drawing of somebody else, finally you are communicating to your daughter, right? अभी ये तो हद ही हो गई.
No, the publishers actually.
But at least did you receive some kind of a letter where the father is describing a cultural tradition of the country and how to preserve the cultural tradition? I don't know. I haven't received, so you must have. So that is the status of anthropology today. We had to continue with the topics from 1927 Forest Act. So, where did we stop yesterday? Please take it. 1927 Forest Act. 1927 Forest Act. The intention of the act was to consolidate all the then existing laws related to forests, comma, transit of forest products, transit of forest products, transit, and the duties that can be levied, transit of forest products, and the duties that can be levied on the items declared as forest products. Right, in the next point. The act dealt with a categorization of forests that was more akin to the 1878 legislation. Go back what you have written there, the categorization in 1878 legislation. What were the names given? Reserved forests. Come back. That is reserved forests, village forests, protected forests, full stop. It added details. Regarding the control over forests. It recognized economic importance of forests, and hence strengthened the Department of Forests, with prescribing punishments for violation of forest laws. A formal list of minor forest produce was provided as the demand for such items had increased. Right, in the next point. Private forests that were earlier largely outside the control of the government were now to be possibly taken over by the government. It was under the pretext that environment and forest resource have to be protected. But in practice, it seemed to be the preservation of interests of the rulers. The act in different sections prohibited activities such as tree felling, burning, grazing, quarrying, hunting, and manufacturing activities in the forest areas. It alongside mentioned specific monetary punishments and occasionally imprisonments of particular time periods. For analysts, such clauses added strength to the powers of Department of Forests. Added strength to the power of Department of Forests. Continue writing there. The increasing demand for timber and exploitation of resources was also linked to the legislation allowing contractor system to deal with logging activities. Come to the next one. Post-independent legislations and policies. According to R.C. Verma, write in the brackets the name of the book, Indian Tribes Through Ages, bracket close. The post-independent policies were a replica of exploitative colonial policies. It was merely, write in quotes, a white master a white master becoming a brown master. A white master becoming a brown master with the continuation of exploitation of the tribal in the interest of a non-tribal. Look at the list of the policies that you have written. 1952 National Forest Policy. 1952 National Forest Policy. It proposed to raise sturdily sturdy, S-T-E-A-D-I-L-Y, the area under forest cover to about two-thirds of the land area in hills and mountains. Secondly, it categorized the forests into, number one, protected forests that are essential for physical and climatic needs of the country. Secondly, national forests to be used for economic needs of the country. Thirdly, village forests to meet the fuel and domestic needs of the villages. Fourthly, tree lands for general aesthetic and socializing purposes. Indira Park atla anamata. Tree land socializing. Keep writing the third point there. The policy laid emphasis on number one, discouraging the tribals from the practice of shifting cultivation. Discouraging the tribals from the practice of shifting cultivation. Write in the brackets. With an immediate legislation banning the practice. Secondly, increasing efficiency of forest administration through adequate legislations, right in the brackets. Specific legislations were lined up. For conservation and punishment of wildlife offenses. Thirdly, promoting research in forestry. Fourthly, controlling grazing in the forest lands. With appropriate punishments. Fifthly, providing head loads of fuel wood to the nearby villagers. Sixthly, this is very important, you should be underlining this, improving the availability of commercial wood for industrial uses. And seventhly, increasing the area under man-made forests. I asked that one to be underlined because you look at the previous point. You said that head loads of firewood have to be allowed for the nearby population, whereas for somebody who is an industrial exploiter, who is not really satisfied with the head loads, you would be sending the truckloads to him unhindered. That was the grouse of tribals there. The ones who have been living on the forest, you are actually showing a mercy as if we are the beggars, whereas for the exploiter, you are actually looting, allowing him to loot the whole thing. Keep writing. Based on the policy, a commission was appointed in 1961. To evaluate the performance of forest policies and acts. The commission highlighted 1961, meaning this was the Debar Commission. The commission highlighted undermining of tribal interests and importance to be given to village forests. In 1976, a National Commission on Agriculture was constituted that dealt with the topics of forestry, shifting cultivation, and minor forest produce. it suggested that tribal rights over forests to be respected and given importance than commercial exploitation for industrial purposes. Right in the next paragraph. Through these episodes, the stage was set depicting the protagonists of tribal rights and environmentalists as the warring factions. Warring factions. It led to the later events that presented policies and acts with a clear absence of an understanding of a need to respect the simple societies alongside industrial requirements. It shall not be a competition between them. But a happy synthesis of two worlds that are at different levels of cultural evolution. Such a thinking led to discussions of the so-called sustainable development, right in the brackets. The concept that still struggles to find its own Indian meaning. The concept that still struggles to find its own Indian meaning. Right in the next paragraph. The 1980 Forest Conservation Act. the 1980 Forest Conservation Act. We said to you, the stage is set where two different groups are there. If you are a conservationist, you are fighting the tribal. If you are a protagonist of tribal, you are blaming the forest department and the other people for confiscation of the rights of the tribals. So it is as if two enemies are dealing with the same commodity right now. The 1980 Forest Conservation Act, it imposed a total ban on any land conversion notified under forests for non-forest purposes. The rights of conservation, underline the word right, it's actually responsibility, but the act says the rights of conservation of forests totally are with Government of India. Right in the brackets. It indicates that the indigenous populations have no say either in conservation or in exploitation. Either in conservation or in exploitation, bracket close. Cultivation of medicinal plants, practice of primitive horticulture, through the techniques of slash and burn, hoe and burn, etc., were restricted. At a few places, the ban of conversion of forest land had a negative impact on providing basic services to tribals. In the newfound situations of culture contact, where an external intervention through primary health centers, schools, etc., has become inevitable. The clause of banning conversions, the cause of banning conversions for non-forest purposes. ఏది బంగారం? I am reading the whole paragraph. At a few places, the ban of conversion ante malli vachi adagoddandi, this is not religious conversion. People will ask. At a few places, the ban of conversion of forest land had negative impact on providing basic services to tribals. Stop. In the newfound situations of culture contact, where an external intervention through primary health centers, schools, etc., has become inevitable, the clause of banning conversion of forest land for non-forest purposes created hurdles for the basic tribal development. In certain remote areas, providing electricity facilities through laying electric lanes was also difficult. Right, in the next paragraph. In 1988, a Roy Berman committee, appointed by the Union Home Ministry was to provide an anthropological perspective on the forest policies. It recommended, write in bullet points there, it recommended to bring a tribal forest policy including the interests of individual tribals, local forest communities, with the national objectives or interests, including the interests of individual tribals, local forest communities with the national interests. Secondly, such a policy shall fulfill needs of ecological security, food, fuel, fodder, and other needs of the locals, apart from catering to the medium and large industries apart from catering to the medium and large industries. Thirdly, active people's participation to be encouraged in the conservation of forests. Fourthly, initiatives of social forestry must be expanded to ensure participation and economic benefit of the local communities. Right in the next paragraph. As if to implement the recommendations, don't mind the word as if, couple of times we have already used. As if to implement the recommendations, the new forest policy 1988 was brought in. For the first time, the policy spoke about eliminating insensitivities towards the tribals. Its objective was to maintain environmental stability, conserving natural heritage, checking soil erosion, and efficient utilization of forest produce. To achieve these goals, it called for massive people's movements. Right in the next paragraph. With regard to social forestry, it introduced non-tribal forest contractors for implementing the forestry activities. It was justified on the pretext that the tribals lacked the ability to invest as contractors. But in practice, But in practice, it opened doors. It opened doors for unhindered exploitation, by the non-tribals, through a proper legislative support. On the other hand, the policy totally banned entry of tribals into the reserve forests. A special tribal marketing federation, TRIFED, TRIFED. A special tribal marketing federation was constituted to address tribal exploitation in dealing with minor forest produce. Write a question to be answered by you as an assignment. You would be referring to the Ministry of Tribal Affairs. The question is comment on the performance of TRIFED in addressing tribal needs. Though I'll be adding that link to your Dropbox, you can go home and see today. It's a very well written, simple document that talks about. I'll slightly give a briefing before we continue to write from there. Many of us have this habit of purchasing certain very tribal products. Like honey or shika, etc. Most of us buy from people like Dabur. I don't have any animosity with them. My only concern is the quality of honey that we regularly use. If at all you are a regular user of a pure product of honey, you can understand that what we are buying, whether from Dabur or anybody else for that matter, including, I don't know. What we are actually getting in the bottle is not more than sugar water, not more than a concentrated sugar syrup. People might differ. No. Generally, when we try buying from a tribal fellow, he shows us with the test whether it is a pure one or not. You can administer the same test. If it proves, fine. Otherwise, and look at the price also. The full bottle of honey, might be available for about 100 or 150 rupees if at all we are buying from a tribal man. That is, and with that 150 or 100 rupees we bargain. Whereas this Dabur fellow comes up with this small bottle at maybe 125 rupees. We don't mind paying in the Visa card. There is no bargain also, and there are no offers. Now this is what is regularly happening. But when we look at the very tribal fellow, The idea of establishing this federation was to simplify the marketing facilities. The idea is somebody will purchase from those of you who lived in the forest areas, tribal areas, you know it very much better. They collect it, the tribal collects it, and then some representative of TriFed. Actually, TriFed has to be the fellow who purchases from the tribal. That's the theoretical purpose. And TriFed would be either having its own stalls in the towns or cities, etc., so that the tribal will not have a problem of marketing by himself or then going and establishing his own shops, which is actually not really possible. And then it is also to ensure an optimum price to the tribal. That's the key factor there. Now, at several places, I'm not saying that throughout the country, at many places what has happened was TriFed was not having its own representatives. There has come an intermediary there. So it's like they are putting up some kind of a contractor, which though is not set on paper. So the contractor does the work. Contractor would sell to the TriFed or directly to the TriFed shops that are existing there. Nevertheless, the ideal situation, the ideals, the objectives that are given on the worksheet there in the Tribal Affairs Ministry, I want you to go through all that. We understand that ideals exist definitely on the paper. We always struggle to reach the ideals there. Write a last sentence there about the policy. An interesting new breakthrough of the policy was allowing certain, underline certain, allowing certain specific tribals to practice shifting cultivation, with appropriate safeguards, to benefit their own economic subsistence. Write in the brackets. The practice, though was banned by a law, was anyway in practice across India with the necessary extra legal procedures. I didn't want to write that corrupt practices are there, officers are in corruption, etc. I somehow don't want to use the word there. Come to the next one. See, on this alone there can be a question. The next law that you have written there is the Forest Rights Act. Forest Rights Act 2006. Forest Rights Act 2006. Keep writing. First you write the original title. This is the short form that we get, Forest Rights Act 2006. Everywhere we look for shortcuts. Write down the original title. Scheduled tribes and other forest dwellers, scheduled tribes and other forest dwellers, Preservation of Rights Act, Preservation of Rights Act 2006. Many of you must have come across this act. Sir, when we had begun writing, talking about the forest policies, etc., we painfully were writing, or pretentiously painfully writing, that the forest rights, absolute forest rights of the tribals were being substituted or gradually confiscated. We were giving them some kind of concessions and privileges. The maximum privilege that we were giving them was you can take a head load. And there was high discouragement even for cultivation of medicinal plants within the forest area, because that is somebody else's responsibility. We were also promptly laying the boundaries there in the reserve forest area. The entry of the tribal was considered to be trespassing. On the other hand, the gates are wide open for the contractors to lead his rally of trucks into the reserve forest. Less controls on him. Sometimes the borders do not operate when certain people are trying to go in and out. This was something that was happening, and all the while we said that land conversion is not possible, only for the forestry purposes, non-forestry purposes you cannot, because of which sometimes other problems were coming up, if at all. So that was where I want you to go back and study a little more detail about the concept of forest villages and revenue villages. Because with time, especially after 2005, 2006, we started to have these things in news, that thousands of forest villages are now being converted into the revenue villages. Those two terms you have heard, right? You have heard those two terms, revenue village and, yes or no? In the class we have said, What's the revenue village? Revenue village is as the name suggests, it generates revenue or it takes revenue. Basically it deals with revenue. So one is, it has an administrative, it is an administrative unit. Revenue village is and before saying that it's a revenue generating or revenue consuming unit, it has to be first of all established as a unit, meaning that there has to be proper boundaries set. There has to be land survey conducted. Land survey is very important. That's the founding principle of a revenue village. Now that there is diversification of functions, but in the initial times, revenue official was the one who would always be carrying his chain or tape, and then who would be always doing the measurement on the field, land surveys. So the departments were also titled as land survey and revenue. Unless otherwise you survey the land, you don't know what revenue you will get and from where you will get. So a revenue village is something that has proper boundaries laid out by the land surveys. It is an administrative unit. The purpose of the administrative unit is that you should be able to execute the developmental purposes, developmental programs. Whether it is the district administration or the taluka administration, it is that unit where you can actually execute developmental programs. And fourth, very important, is that the individuals living there, the inhabitants there, can possess the land holding rights, meaning that land pattas. These would not be existing for the forest village. It is not simply that it is the village in the forest. So suppose I am asking you to define a forest village, it's a village in the forest. You can't have land rights there. You don't have, it is not a revenue generating one for the purposes as it is generally said. You cannot have an administering unit or the unit that is going to execute the developmental programs. So whatever defining features you are mentioning for the revenue village, they will not be there for the forest village. So particular numbers are also mentioned actually, 7,000 odd revenue village, forest villages are there in the country as far as we have identified. But now when this particular act has come, 2006 Act, the Forest Rights Act, see, one basic thing that was supposed to change was that an attitudinal change. This is what I was saying earlier also. One committee or one occasion would come in the process of history and evolution. An organization or an individual might come who would start saying that, see, whatever the terminology, the language that we were using earlier is not really apt, we have to change the language. Roy Berman was the one who started saying this. That was that committee that you have written. In the 1980s it had come. And after about 20 years of time, we woke up for the occasion. And the terminology has come. Forest Rights Act, or protection of rights of the tribals, protection of the rights of the forest dwellers. Initially that was not the title. The title was supposed to be the tribals alone. But later they say scheduled tribes and other forest dwellers. So you have actually, the idea itself got dissolved. As long as you are treating the tribal as a special entity, his rights can be thought of and his rights may be preserved or protected. But if at all you are joining the tribals with the rest of the population, you have done the first mistake. Nevertheless, we will have to appreciate that the political master or administrator has actually thought of protecting the tribal rights or giving back. This was the first initiative where the government thought that let us hand over certain rights. And interestingly, the rights over land were the first ones that they have considered. Just imagine the forest tribes, the forest villages, which did not have a right over land till then. They did not have land pattas. That is nobody's land, only government was owning the land. Now people can own, people can get the land patta. But if you look at the definition of the forest village, that is not possible. You cannot. That is the reason why several forest villages were getting converted into revenue villages, so that you can implement the developmental programs also. Now there are certain clauses there. See, any good intention might have some kind of bad experiences. The clauses have to be properly laid. Now the question is, who should be considered as the forest dweller? Who should be considered as the forest dweller? So for which they have set some time period. Before this particular date, before this particular date, you must have been staying there for so many years or so many generations. This was the criteria. But what is the date? That has to be decided. That became a controversy. First they have given one date and then they modified to the other. First they have fixed the date of 1980 because that was, see, these are all arbitrary things. Not that there was something sacrosanct about them. 1980 Forest Conservation Act they have brought into practice. So that was the date they have considered. Later they said no, ye to bahut piche ho gaya, isko saame khichenge. Then they said the date on which the 2006 Forest Rights Act was first tabled in the Parliament, that was December 2005. They have brought down. So बहुत ही करीब हो गया. So it is like giving an opportunity for the recent people who started to stay there also. Now the problem is, how many years you will have to show your residence? They said 75 years or 3 or 4 generations. 75 years you should be able to show on the paper. Who was sitting in the forest to give you a certificate that this man had been staying there? It's as simple as, I think today or yesterday, that Indian Express was writing about this. One of the senior officers was writing about how we make plans and programs. See, in the government you will be taught how to make plans and programs. You will make the plans and programs so that you cannot implement them. So the officer was writing, we make laws with all the effect, with all the efforts, and we feel very happy when the law cannot be implemented. This is actually the situation there. So the date is one problem, the years, and then who actually should. He was also in that article talking about pension scheme, you know? Pension scheme. There is a requirement in the pension scheme that you should show that you are alive. You should show that you are alive. You are not a dead man walking. And one clause he was actually talking about, which they have introduced, that you should get the certificate from signature from the Patwari. Many of the places, especially in the hilly areas, the institution of Patwari does not exist. If there is no Patwari, you cannot get the certificate. And hence, see, the objective is you should give pension, no doubt. You should show that you are going to give pension, but you should also save money. You should also save revenue of the government. So it's happening up, de bhi rahe ho aur nahi bhi de rahe ho. So when a large number of people are actually getting eliminated from the list, you are not at fault. But the people are not able to present the required paper. So that is their problem, not the government. The government is ready to give. You get the paper, we will give you. It's as simple as it is. ये बहुत ही दर्दनाक चीज हो गई. I am alive in front of you, but I have to show to you that I am alive. Now coming back here, they were giving opportunity. One was land rights, the other one was rights related to minor forest produce. And of course, this third issue is that if at all I am getting land, how much of land will be given to me? That's also an arbitrary number. First they said some number, then they increased the number. So many committees, subcommittees of parliament, etc. There was so much of fighting, etc. But finally, the silver line is that it got passed. It came into existence. It became an act. 2006. 10 saal ho gaye. An apt season for UPSC to ask a question. Because this is also the season why our expectation was that several papers will come on the extent of implementation and review of implementation. But surprisingly, not many papers came. Generally, research bodies, academicians, they will be looking for such opportunities. Government also will be looking for such opportunities. किसी का 10 साल हो गया, 50 साल हो गया, तो एक कमिटी डाल दिया, उसने कुछ लिख दिया, and you are भूखे शेरों की तरह देख रहे हो, कुछ आ जाए तो मैं ले लूँ एग्जाम के लिए, kind of a thing. But unfortunately, in this particular case, nothing had happened. But I don't think UPSC will lose that opportunity. A question to aana hi hai, kind of a thing. So make a note there. We are writing about Forest Rights Act. The act was the first attempt. The act was the first attempt by Government of India to transfer rights over forests, and forest resources to the forest living communities. To the forest living communities. its significance, its significance, as was brought out by, if you remember, you write their names, otherwise also you can write the list there, by Professor Chakravarti and Srivastav. Professor Chakravarti and Srivastav, I am listing 5 or 6 significant items they are talking about. Number 1, community rights. Community rights. For the first time were considered by a mainstream legislation, alongside individual rights of tribals, Secondly, rights in and over disputed lands, and those related to forest villages, unsurveyed villages, old forest habitations were to be considered. Thirdly, a right to protect, conserve, and regenerate community forest produce was to be given to the local communities. Fourthly, displaced communities due to mining and industrialization in forest area, were to be considered. Fifthly, forest inhabitants now have a right over developmental activities. Continue writing there. Accordingly, the existing legislations obstructing availability of land for developmental activities need be amended. Write down the side head there. Important clauses. Write in bullet points. Number 1. The Act covers The Act covers not only scheduled tribes, but also the non-scheduled tribes, and caste groups inhabiting the forests, or depending on forest resources for economic subsistence. Secondly, initially 25th October 1980 was prescribed as the date for which the locals have to prove their forest residence for claiming rights. The date was later changed. To 13th of December 2005, when the bill was tabled in the Parliament. Thirdly, the claimants have to prove a residence of 3 generations or 75 years to access the rights. Fourthly, the Act defined the term forests and forest dwellers accommodating non-STs and non-tribals for whom a common ceiling of land holding is prescribed. Right, the next point. Gram Sabhas are given enhanced powers with respect to forest conservation, such as the final right to decide about conversion of land from forests to agriculture purposes, lies with the Gram Sabha. Similarly, in implementing Wildlife Conservation Act, it is given rights in the cases of offenses below rupees 5,000. It's as simple as you have given, but you have not given. Write the next point. Different kinds of rights proposed to be given under the Act are classified into number 1, land rights, 2, use rights on the minor forest produce, and thirdly, a right to protect and conserve. By doing so, the legislation respected the indigenous knowledge of conservation and exploitation. Right in the next paragraph. The act was criticized for firstly, arbitrarily fixing the land ceiling, and dateline to prove forest residence. Secondly, providing a possibility for exploiting the law by the elite and non-tribals. Thirdly, no provision was made to accommodate the interests of shifting cultivators, pastoralists, and cattle herders, as the law primarily deals with agricultural communities. Fourthly, in spite of having an objective of simplifying rules related to minor forest produce ambiguities are still unresolved. Fifthly, no provisions made regarding grazing of cattle and utilization of medicinal plants. And no provisions made to prevent any unscrupulous elements taking advantage of the deadline of residence. Right in the next paragraph. The legislation led to several forest villages being converted to revenue villages, thereby facilitating a good number of tribals non-tribal and caste groups getting land rights. Sir, because many of you are actually aiming for the next year's exam, let's see if any good time report comes so that you can get an opportunity. So you still have time. Be on a lookout in the newspapers, etc. If any such report comes, you can accommodate that either positively or negatively. Are you fine in the class? Writing is okay? Enjoying? Leda. You should enjoy. There's no other go. Because it is like a 500-meter relay. You are in the last lap. You'll have to. Some small thing here. I'll give you a brief structure of this topic so that you can add examples based on your taste. The topic is development and displacement. Already we have used this word in the Debhar Commission, development-induced diseases, development-induced displacement. Whenever such a question is asked, you will have to present in your answer the kind of arguments raised by B.D. Sharma and his group, criticizing the first Prime Minister's request or demand that sacrifices to be made in the national interest. The questions remain whose nation it is and who have to make sacrifices. Basically, the problem was that the tribals who were getting displaced at one point of time though promises were made of resettlement and rehabilitation, the packages were not ready. But with experience, now government has come up with alternatives of that kind, proposals of that kind. It's not that they're not giving anything. Resettlement and rehabilitation, they had been promising. See, at some places, the picture was not so very encouraging from the ground level also. It's not, see, because you're writing an anthropology paper, you tend to write a totally one-sided one. But there are occasions where government was trying to provide an alternative, but people were not coming forth. Because after all, there are inherent fears. See, a friend of ours who had been working in the tribal area as an administrator, he was talking about it. But even if we promise, they are not coming forth. Some of them have become so very shrewd and very smart. And the demands are too very huge. But see, unfortunately, this element shall not be given such an importance in the answer. That is the handicap here. So what we will be doing is couple of very powerful reports I will share with you with five top pointers there, so that you can very confidently, very vocally indicate in your answer that, see, even when occasionally government is coming up with some kind of an alternative, people are not really receiving. See, I was not saying this earlier. I was not saying this earlier to the student. But then when things are changing, when from the other side government is also coming up with reasonable options, but now initially we would look at the conventional way of looking at things, then we would. See, first question people might ask is that, why do we study this in anthropology? Developmental programs and kind of things. Pick up any book of anthropology, it says that a large percentage of the displaced are tribals. Tribals is our subject matter, and hence we study in anthropology. So it's like my enemy's enemy is my friend, kind of a thing. The connection is that most of these developmental initiatives are happening in the regions where tribals are inhabiting. Though we call those areas marginalized areas, even the marginalized areas are having stocks of resources. And about 40, if at all we see the calculations, 40% of the displaced, more than 40% of the displaced are tribals. Though they are less than 9% in the overall Indian population, in terms of displaced, more than 40% are. Fortunately, in Indian case, most of these projects are not in the urban centers. And interestingly, the inundations, suppose you are constructing dams, the inundations are not coming up in the urban centers. Maybe the sites are tactically identified so that no urban center would be underwater. People might criticize if I say that. You might show several reasons saying that, see, appropriate sites are not here, appropriate sites are there. And naturally inundation is occurring in those sites alone. I'm giving this example maybe referring to several dams that have been coming up on Sangpo River or Angze River Yangtze is known for several controversies. One of them is that some of the dams that they were proposing were to inundate the urban centers. We don't have such kind of a situation in Indian case, but nevertheless, those are the things that we generally consider as the developmental programs or developmental initiatives that are leading to displacement of the people. Dams, generally we place them as the topmost one, the single largest highly displacing entity. Though I haven't clearly indicated in the infrastructure, there are several linear projects such as roads and railway lines. In some of the prestigious railway lines, people have written reports and small books. There are two projects of that kind. One is the Araku Valley Railway Project, and the other one is the Nilgiri Hill Railway Project. Araku Valley Railway Project, the displacement related report was written by Bhuria. Bhuria was the chairperson of Scheduled Tribe Commission. Long time back he had written, not after. If you see the print also, the books are worn out. The first publications have turned yellow long back. So it means that very, very old reports. Linear projects, according to Bhuria, are much more devastating than the projects like dams, because you are actually totally going through that particular line. It is the death line into the tribal world, according to him. Sometimes we feel that people are dramatizing. And on the other hand, while you were writing a little while ago, we said that people were not getting land for electric lines laying. Those are also linear projects. So it's like, if I give, there is a problem. If I don't give, there is a problem. We are in a fix. Nevertheless, the first laying of these roads or railway lines, definitely that had opened opportunities for the non-tribals and outsiders to enter the tribal area, which we were not doing earlier. Once a road is laid, you actually don't have a control over culture contact. Reason could be whatever. It may be to provide them with infrastructure, facilities, or whatever. So these are some projects that have two sides. One is that the culture is getting lost, that's anyway there. That's getting adulterated or, kind of. But of course, if we are respecting the opportunities they are creating through the infrastructure, but the flip side is the displacement and how the rehabilitation has to be. Now we will see some of the examples. From the northern tip to the southern tip and west to east, you have tens and hundreds of dams and big and small kind of ones where displacement was bound to happen. Now the issue is that there are two popular ways of providing resettlement rehabilitation. One was that cash for land, and the other one was land for land. You must have read all these things in your general studies very clearly. Land for land is generally the first one that any displaced would look for. Suppose I am losing a 2 acre of land, I expect a minimum of 2 acre with the comparable quality. The problem will be quality many times, it may not be quantity. It's as simple as somebody who has lost the land in the MP where you are very much near to the river basin, a lush green land that you have lost because of whatever dam or whatever, and then you are actually shown a land somewhere in Rajasthan, where you do not know what to breathe, whether it is sand or air, kind of a thing. The quality matters. And it is not simply that when you are getting displaced, the whole community, when it gets displaced to the new place, the acceptance in the new cultural setting by somebody who is very new to you. See, on paper it looks very good. No, you got displaced here, you are getting land, it's simply that you pack your bags, go there, land is readily available, you start tilling. Things may not be so very straightforward. You are not in a modern kind of a setting where you are getting a transfer from one city to the other. Even if that is the case, the whole lot of hassles that you face, being an urbanite, being a very well-read, educated person, it's only that the city's name is changing. After all, brands are the same, malls are the same. It's only that the names of the roads, half of them anyway go with Mahatma Gandhi, Indira Gandhi, Rajiv Gandhi, and they are also the same. In spite of that, you have a problem, and we are talking about a tribal fellow who is moving, crossing the borders and trying to go there. One classical case study is there of the SSP Austis, who were actually not given land by the MP government. They said that they don't have, but Rajasthan said, "Aap le lo, aa jao," with wide arms open. They went there. They could not simply because of the land quality, which they did not mind. It is basically that non-accommodative attitude in the nearby regions, a culture shock. And then there are a few other things. One could be, ठीक है, land नहीं है तो cash दे दो, which evaporates very soon. Valuation is one problem. How do you value the land? When you are displacing, it is not simply the land value that you should calculate. There are other things also. The cultural costs are there, the social costs are there. All this has to be properly monetized. So that becomes a big task. And third expectation is that when we are getting displaced, we expect the same kind of a setting. I can relate it to something like when Nagarjun Sagar was being dug for the foundations. When they were digging, they found those archaeological wealth. Then Prime Minister said, it's very valuable, so we will try to have a proper setting. So he had given one hill so that you can take the whole thing, replicate it there. At least something like that. You give a place where all our entities can be shifted, our social fabric doesn't get disturbed, all our kinsmen to be there at one place, including our gods to be shifted, an accommodation for our God's place, etc. This becomes a difficult task. But then in the resettlement and rehabilitation policy, I have given to you in the book number 4, if at all you had gone through, kindly do that. A very detailed kind of a note is given there. I was not giving, government was giving. It is so very detailed that things like, cow sheds, if you are relocating the cow shed, there's a particular amount that they are telling. And house site, if you are losing some particular amount, they would say. Agricultural implements we will have to, then there is something. So a very clear monetization. For the first time, it doesn't actually happen that way. The legislations generally don't go with so much of a detail. Later executive orders will come where calculations would be incorporated. But then in the legislation itself, all those numbers are given. That looks very interesting. But see, we have to appreciate the administrative intention, governmental intention. Many times intentions itself don't come. So many decades we have waited, intention was not coming. Finally, intention has come, so first you should feel happy. Second thing is that so much of monetization, the details are also given. I'm not really talking about the efficiency of to what extent the rehabilitation was done, etc. In the first place, when a paper is released by the government, there would be thousands of mouths to criticize. I want to give you something. He wanted to give saris. Okay. People have problems with color. तुझे अच्छा कलर मिला, मुझे ये वाला नहीं मिला. And another problem is that you said that handloom will be given. ये तो polyester के है. No. I was actually feeling pity for him. 5 lakh odd sarees and so many, I don't know, the money there. ये तो it's like, you are giving and जूते खा रहे हो. Maybe it was better you did. And I was actually wondering at it, one after the other, the kind of promises and the schemes, jaldi kar rahe. And many of the things where you are actually suffering getting beaten up. It was something like not less than a battle, battle is a small word. It was something like a huge war that is happening at the sari collection centers. I was only wondering that why only you are using the female for all this. Maybe कभी आप लुंगी दो या फिर towels दो लड़कों के लिए, कच्छा दो, कुछ भी दो, and see how they actually fight. मेरा कलर कैसा, तेरा कलर कैसा है, kind of a thing. You only give the opportunities and you only use the female for all this. Jockey. I didn't say anything. Look at that. Source Lok Sabha. I only wanted you to see this. You may not remember the numbers, but this one. If those are the numbers in millions that are getting displaced, this is what is happening. And many times the noise made is also by the dam ousties. If at all prominent NGOs emerge, that is also in the such regions only. But we will have to understand the problem at a very ground level. You should appreciate that it is difficult in the adaptation in the new region. When you are displacing, you should have a respectful shift in the residence and then kind of economic subsistence that you promise. Somehow, the speed at which displacement has been happening, resettlement and rehabilitation is not catching up with that speed. The problem primarily is with the speed. You did not settle one issue, you are going to the other one. There's so much of fast doing of things. And let's see this is a couple of examples I'm giving. You have in your own region, you might be having tens and hundreds of projects based on where you live. I wanted to somehow bring Polavaram, definitely. Maybe in one of the classes I should be showing some videos on that too. You need not have to write the whole thing. I wanted to bring Subarnarekha too. Development refugees, that's a fashionable word these days. Generally we use refugees for the people who are fleeing their national boundaries. Here we are using this word for internal displacement. The problem was that about those refugees, we have international conventions and laws, existing organizations existing. For internal displacements, nothing of that kind was existing. Human Rights Commission had been talking about it for quite a long time, and finally we started talking about displacement policy, but there is no one single organization established to deal with such kind of a thing. That is still a lacuna that we have. A full-fledged organization. So when millions of people are becoming development refugees, there is a real requirement of a full-fledged organization to deal with this valuation and then see the progress, etc. Generally, when you write the answers, you write so very religiously. Make the displacement related cost along with the project cost, add that there. And then you also might be writing, see to it that rehabilitation, resettlement happens before you actually start construction of the project. वो तो होता ही नहीं कभी. Classy examples are there world over. Brazil has set a record for that, the best of the resettlement policies, the way they have executed. So to write it looks cute, goody goody, अच्छा लगता है. Before you start the project, you settle the resettlement and rehabilitation. See, at a personal level, I was highly appreciative about the resettlement rehabilitation policy, the detail they have given. But people are there, and then we also have seen multiple displacements, if at all they happen, how to deal with them. Do you give them so many times? Sharma comes handy there. He was talking about the ousties at several places. B.D. Sharma, 5 times displaced. The same population, 5 times displaced. But multiple displacements are not actually mentioned there. And somehow the pastoral communities, the nomadic communities or artisan communities in the tribes, they find no place anywhere. We found only LP Vidyarthi talking about them. But then I will show you, if possible today, there are a couple of articles. Yeah. Industries, whole lot of them. Vidyarthi started talking early days of industrialization in the central Indian belt. Name it, every tribe was affected. So you can, based on whatever newer projects we are coming up with, POSCO, BOSCO, jo bhi hai, whatever comes into news, you can accommodate them. जैसा कि वो नैनो कार वाला प्रोजेक्ट भी, some states rejected, whatever may be the clause. The clause the rejected states were showing later was that no, it is environmentally harmful. They were asking for some sites. अब तुम्हारा डील नहीं हुआ तो अब क्या करें? I didn't say. But then they welcomed and he produced. उसका जो होना था हुआ, वो कार का वो बात की बात है. But I should appreciate one of my very close friends. All of us as a community, we have a problem, that is her obesity. And I should appreciate Nano for that. हमको तो कभी नहीं लगा कि नैनो एक नींबू के ऊपर से भी गुजर पाएगा. But the lady drives with more than a ton of weight. She is driving, and the car is in balance. That's the biggest surprise for me. It is not tilting, it is balanced. So अच्छी गाड़ी है इसका मतलब. And then she actually drives cross country on that. My God. So it is definitely a worthwhile piece. This is something that I should tell you, Shar. For defense establishments and the most prestigious one, we day in and day out talk about this. And then our satellite launch center there, Nellore. Off the coast of Nellore, we have that small island from where we keep on testing, sending. We feel so proud about that island. Very less people know that there was a wildlife sanctuary on that island before rocket launching center was actually installed. वाइल्ड लाइफ को तो कहीं कहीं जू में इधर उधर बिठा दिया, बट व्हाट हैपेंड टू द ट्राइब्स हु वर स्टेइंग ऑन दैट आइलैंड नोबडी न्यू. Maybe that's where I go back to Thakkar, who spoke of having national parks for the tribals. Maybe agar vaisa hota to the tribals who were inhabiting on that island, they could have got accommodated in some national park or the other. So many times what happens is the national interest takes a precedence, and small ये जो है ना होता है उसका तो गिनती भी नहीं होता है. When we say this, people may take offense of this. No, when we say that, okay, no, that island was having some population, the tribal population, we don't know where they went, kind of a thing. Because after all, it is the national interest. That is the reason why I always feel Government of India one fine day should feel that Lord Balaji's 7 hills are are having a strategic importance, and then we are going to have a defense and kind of a rocket launching station there. Mr. Balaji shift somewhere else, kind of a thing, and then let's see what Balaji will do. I always have that in mind. Acha. This word I really like, beachside development, ecotourism projects. Ecotourism तो बहुत ही fanciful हो गया आजकल. In the name of ecotourism, you can do anything non-ecological, anti-ecological. Most of the mangroves we have lost with that title. Beachside development. Beach पे क्या क्या हो? It's that beach has to be available to you. Huge amount of mangrove wealth we have lost, especially on the western coast. Several others. That's only one I was writing. Name any wildlife sanctuary these days, that is the problem. It is becoming a misnomer now. It had to be a sanctuary for the wildlife, but it is no more. Interestingly, huge number of hotels are coming up in and around. It is bound to happen that the wildlife will wither away. Whatever small pockets where they are left, maybe ecotourism should be allowed, but leave alone the hotels or whatever commercial activity outside. Let them walk. No problem. People can take a walk into the wilderness, and then maybe after a day, maybe छोटे camp कर लो अंदर जो भी करना है. If at all you are able to handle whatever wildlife in a proper way, and then if you are alive, you go back. आपका safari भी चाहिए, ये भी चाहिए, and then you want the tiger numbers also to be intact. Difficult. I take a lot of blame for lakes of that kind, because I think half the bird life we consumed as children. We used to go to the lake places, and then huge lot of birds used to come, and then can't help it. At every level, as an individual, we must have been responsible. These are only a few projects. Infrastructure, Araku, Nilgiri, Konkan. These 3 are linear projects. Konkan became very popular. Wildlife activists, tribal activists, name it, they were there. But I am very thankful to that. वो कुछ movie था, क्या था? Chennai Express. At least some of the beautiful places along the Western Ghats he could show. It becomes unfortunate after that people start making a beeline to those places, spoiling whatever little sanctity that is left out. Advertisement becomes a difficult thing. जैसा कि वो हो गया आपका क्या था आमिर खान वाला 3 Idiots. That particular क्या lake था? Somoruru, something like that. And then after that, now if you go and see, वो मूवी के लिए तो ठीक था. So much of littering around. Actually, you should not show Indians any new tourist places. You should not show any tourist places to Indians. What you do is you go and litter. You don't have patience to put it in the dustbin that is just nearby. I really felt very happy on one of our tours somewhere deep in Kerala. A taxi driver, he had properly screwed up some of our colleague passengers who were taking liberty of drawing the glass down and trying to put, this is what you do. And then the drive, I really love those people there. That's the reason why that virginity is still existing in those places, that sanctity is still existing, the greenery is still there. He immediately stopped the car, asked the lady to go pick up, आप बैग में डालिए, अब घर जाकर मुझे दे दीजिए, मैं बाहर फेंक दूंगा. Or else the option is also there for him. He asked her to separate. अगर कुछ आपको फेंकना है या no, you just go dig and put it there. I think we need such kind of people to regulate us. So those are the major issues that I was talking about. Who is an oustee? That's a problem. Project oustees. Who are the people who are displaced? The policies have to properly give guidelines, definitions. Identifiability is important. It's not like, 3 generations, nobody knows in the forest what had happened. A tiger and lion will not come as an evidence there to say that yes, he was here. In fact, that should happen actually. A proper evidence will come. How will you give the compensation? Abhi to khair, after demonetization, things might be through proper channel on the paper. But if it is cash, the cash doesn't know whose hands are holding it. It's as simple as, when livestock distribution programs were there, livestock also don't know whose campus it is. Today they are in one campus, tomorrow they'll be in the other campus. They have 4 legs to walk and hence they will walk. So those. Above anything else, the one that is not considered very seriously in all these rehabilitation programs is the culture shock. How will you value that culture shock, or how will you compensate it? That's the biggest problem. So today I will put some things in your Dropbox which you will read. In the next couple of classes, we will be taking up certain other tribal problems, miscellaneous ones, jaisa shifting cultivation hai, land alienation is there. So that very quickly I would want to start talking about regionalism. Have a good time, sir. So topics you may write in class number 69. We have started our discussion with the state of anthropology in India today. State of anthropology in India today. Then we completed forest policies. We had a look at the issue of development, displacement, and rehabilitation. Development, displacement, and rehabilitation. 3 topics we said: anthropology in India today, forest policies, and development, displacement, rehabilitation. First one to class ka hi discussion ho gaya, forest policies, class notes, and then in your book also you have one. I don't remember which page and all that. Displacement, rehabilitation, you will receive a mail.